This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider, presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pal, Evan Grant. We are going to have on our podcast today, we're going to talk about the Mavericks' unbelievable fortune in getting the first pick of the draft, moving from 11 to 1. We're going to be joined also by Myah Taylor, our Wings beat writer, to talk about the Wings season starting up on Friday. After that, we'll also talk to Assimakopoulos, our Stars beat writer, talking about the Stars' rampage through the playoffs, and in particular, Nico Harrison and what he means for that. And we'll also talk about the Rangers and their new hitting coach, Bret Boone, and the difference he seems to have made in the lineup already. But first, we're going to talk about those lucky Dallas Mavericks. I got to tell you, the fact that the Mavericks won that lottery, selection, at a 1.8% chance to win it, they move up 10 spots from 11 to 1. Only 3 teams in the history of the lottery have moved up from 11 to 1. And for them to do it, and as I wrote today, on the heels of the greatest misfortune in the history of this franchise, they finally got lucky, and Nico Harrison couldn't have deserved it less. It just feels like there's a little bit of me. The first part of me says, unbelievable that they got him. This is so great that the Mavericks are getting Cooper Flagg, right? But the second part of it is, it's like, this just feels like it's wrong that you can trade, your franchise player, and so you get players in return who look, nobody questions Anthony Davis is a great player. He's on his way to the Hall of Fame. As long as he's healthy, he's a very, very good player. Everybody has just said, if you're going to make a deal like this, you simply can't, do it for that. You have to get more than that. Well, now they got Cooper Flagg, because
this was all part of the plan, Kevin.
This was all part of the plan, right? Because look, here's the thing: if you kept Luka, you're not falling into the lottery. The Mavericks would have stayed out of the lottery, so they would not have gotten Cooper Flagg had they kept Luka. So it is a really crazy thing. I guess it does beg the question: if you had known that this was going to happen, if you had known because of everything that's going to follow after that, they're going to get Cooper Flagg too. Well, I still don't really like the trade from the standpoint. I know what it means to the fans, that Luka's a special player to them. But if you're going to do something like that, to get a guy who's 18, 19 years old, and is also he's probably not I don't know if he's going to be a generational player or not. I think Luka is. Although we didn't know that about Luka when they drafted him. Everybody thought he's really going to be a good player, but how good is he really going to be?
Yeah, but he also wasn't the number 1 pick. I mean, you're hoping for a generational player at number 1.
Yes, you are. And this is considered a good draft. This is considered a draft with several players who can make an impact. But this guy was the consensus number 1. There's nobody else was approaching him. So in a draft of good talent, to have a guy who is the consensus number 1, everybody believes he is, and he fits what the Mavericks want to do. He is a marquee defensive player. He can guard any position on the floor. And that's what the Mavericks want to do. There was a question about him going into his freshman year at Duke about how well he would shoot the 3-pointer. Well, he shot 38.5%. So there's a feeling that there are some scouts that apparently believe that maybe he's not going to be a franchise player, but he's going to be, right there. He's going to be like the second player. I think he has the potential to be more than that, simply because of his age, because of his size, because in a lot of ways he is like Luka. He's 6'9". He's a big kid. He can guard lots of positions. And when he's a good ball handler. There's a question about how well he will shoot, how well he will facilitate, and he may get a chance to do that, as Mike Kurtz pointed out today with us, that he may get a chance to do that with Kyrie Irving out. Right? But I do think the thing is, he steps right in, and that front wall goes, Derek Lively the second, Anthony Davis at power forward, and Cooper Flagg at small forward. That gives you 3 supreme defenders, shot blockers, and then in my scenario, that allows you to move Klay Thompson from small forward to shooting guard, and then when Kyrie Irving is back, obviously he's starting there, and that's not going to happen obviously until at least January, because Kyrie won't be back until then. And there's a question about what they'll do at point guard. I think they probably have to add a veteran point guard at some point here. They're going to have to sign somebody. This kind of necessitated that probably. If they had stayed in the lottery at 11, then they might have drafted a point guard then, although I don't know that would have been a good idea, simply because you have all these veterans on the team and they're in that win now mode. I don't know how much a rookie point guard does for you. But this is an unbelievable stroke of luck for a franchise that's never had any in the lottery.
Well, I've got a few observations.
All right, Evan, let me have them.
One is that I think you and I look at this quote a little bit differently. But when Rick Welts said last night, "What a reversal of fortunes. It's really unimaginable." To me, that was the most damning quote, or the most damning summation of the Luka trade that the club has acknowledged yet. Because they were headed down a bad path. Secondly, I guess now the question is this a better team if you've got a rookie in Flagg? You'll have Kyrie coming back from the surgery, obviously, and you've got Anthony Davis. Is this a better team than if you'd had just Luka and Kyrie coming back from the surgery?
I think it certainly is. There's no question it's a better defensive team. And Luka, Nico has said over and over again, we're all sick of it, defense wins championships. Well, they lost to Boston last year because they didn't have enough offense. It wasn't because
I know, but I want broad generalizations here, because remember, our evaluation of this trade is going to be, did you win more championships than the Lakers? And so I don't want to parse it down as offensive or defensive. Do you think this is a better team?
Well, as I said to start with, there's no question they're a better defensive. They're a much better defensive team. In this scenario now, PJ Washington won't start. He'll be coming off the bench. So that's what he should be doing. He should be coming off the bench. So I think this is from that standpoint. Is Kyrie Irving, when he returns, what will he be like? That's a legitimate question as well. He's 34 years old, coming off a major injury. This is a guy who has relied on his quickness, his change of direction, his burst, probably more so than any player in the league. It's remarkable to watch him on the floor do what he does when he's really going at his age. He plays like a guy who's 22 years old. Well, what will that look like now? So that's a legitimate question. And I don't, he can still be a good player because he's a good shooter and he's a good facilitator. And will he be the Hall of Fame level player that he has been, throughout his career? I don't know. So that's a legitimate question. But strictly from a personnel standpoint, when you're adding a player in the front court like that along with Anthony Davis, that's a lot, right? That's 2 really good players. That's 2, because Cooper's a star already. He's going to be a star, as soon as he walks on the floor. So he's not going to be the first star or the second star, but he can be the third. So that gives them legitimate 3 stars now, right? And they didn't have that before. Before it was always just 2. And before that, it was just 1, before they got Kyrie. So, yes, they have improved the roster. Well, let's just not assume that they're not going to screw this up, because there are some people who think that, maybe they should trade the pick. That's ridiculous. They should not trade the pick.
To me, that's just humor. That's people basically poking fun at the Luka trade continually. There's no reason for them. If you are starting a team right now and you can get the number 1 pick, and he's an 18-year-old who can play at different positions on the floor, it's a no-brainer. You put that guy on your roster.
Well, sure you do, and because here's the thing that
unless you're going to get Giannis out of this.
Yeah, that's a great point. Although the point would be, then you're doubling up at that point. I mean, look, I
Right.
love him. Obviously he's an all-time center, but you're already really strong in the front court. Then, right? You've already got, and obviously in that kind of a deal, you would be sending Derek Lively, you would be probably sending Daniel Gafford, you'd be sending, Flag, the first round pick. You'd be sending lots of things up there with him. The deal for me is that you are in this one stroke of unbelievable luck. You are not only getting a guy who can help you win right now, but you are getting the guy who's going to be the cornerstone of the franchise for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's it, for an older team like this is. I mean, there are some young parts on it, but they're all the ancillary players, right? They're not the key parts, and the key parts are old. Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving are both in their 30s. So now
And I
you're
think you
getting
raise
this
a
too.
great point. You raise a great point because right now you need a face of this franchise. Luka was the face of this franchise, and as we've been over and over again, he was the continuation of the guy who was the face of this franchise for 2 decades. So you need somebody who will be the representative of the Dallas Mavericks, and I think Cooper Flagg gives them the opportunity to do that. You cannot overlook the intrinsic value of that for rebuilding your brand with your fans, which is important. Um, I have one last observation before we get out of here, and that is I just want to know when exactly is Nico going to do the Kirk Cousins "How You Like Me Now" walk after this draft?
I think he needs to keep a very low profile, just like he has all along. He needs to keep doing that. This is the other remarkable thing about all this, Evan, is that players are going to start to phase out, right? Kyrie will phase out over the next couple of years. I'm sure they hope that Anthony Davis is able to play a little longer than that, and that is, that's going to enable them to add players to go along with Cooper, who's going to be under his rookie contract for 5 years, right?
Sure.
So this is just a remarkable set of events that sets up the franchise, which had even if you were signed on with Nico, you had to believe, well, shoot, I'm all in the win now mode. I can sign on with that, but then, boy, what's going to be next? Well, now that's pretty much been taken care of. So, this is the luckiest day. Yesterday was the luckiest day in the history of the franchise. I don't think there's any question about
Oh,
that.
for sure. I mean, when you win the lottery with that level of percentage, the other thing that I want to observe about this whole deal is you and I have been back and forth looking at different websites to determine exactly how long of a long shot this was, and I don't think there's, because of the different ways that people grade this out, I don't think there's any real consensus. I got when I looked, I got that at 1.8% chance. They had the fourth longest chance. You've had situations where you've seen that they had the second biggest jump, right?
Yeah. No, the biggest jump. They tied for the biggest jump with two other
Biggest jump.
franchises.
And so it's amazing that we can't just come to a consensus on what constitutes the longest shot ever. But if you're in the top four long shots of NBA draft history, I would say that, yeah, this is the luckiest day in franchise history.
Because
Not
they
to
never
add in all the other stuff that went on in the last year.
Well, the Mavericks had never even moved up before, not even moved up a little. That was the thing, that you never moved up, and then you moved from 11 to 1. I was studying the Mavericks developments this year have been the most stunning that I can remember. It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm getting up out of bed because my phone's blowing up, and to find out that they traded Luka. So shocking. And then
Yeah, and
I
then you
come
said, let somebody else write that.
Yeah, I said, "Well, Tim, why don't you go ahead and write it? I'll follow up tomorrow." Um, and then I pull into my carport last night, and David Marks, my boss, is calling and say, "Hey, did you go out to the Rangers today?" And I said, "No. Remember, I told you I was going to go out tomorrow to do that story on Bret Boone." And he goes, "Well, I got a proposition for you. The Mavericks just got the first pick in the draft." And I said, "They did what?" I mean, it's just like, how does this all happen in the span of 4 months? It's unbelievable.
It's a funny story that you mentioned that since I was in Detroit on Mother's Day yesterday. I was going to take Gina out for dinner. She wanted to go to Aw Shucks. It's a place she's been to for forever. and just have a casual seafood boil. So I'm there cracking open crabs and peeling shrimp for her, and my phone goes off, and it's somebody texted me that the Mavericks just won the lottery, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't, and I've got like crab Old Bay on my hands and stuff, and I'm like, this town can't get any better when it comes to sports copy than this town.
No, no. And I already thought that anyway, but it is just unbelievable. It just goes from one to the next. And speaking of going from one to the next, now we're adding Myah Taylor, and she's coming in to talk to us a little bit about the Wings. And it just so happens that the Wings also had the first pick of the draft, and of course they took Paige Bueckers, and she will be on display in their very first game for the Stars on Friday. Which I will be there right alongside you to do all that.
You're the Wings, Kevin. The Wings.
What did I say?
The
The
Stars.
Stars.
The Stars. I'm sorry. The Wings.
You've got. There's a lot of stories going around.
There's
You've got
of stuff
a lot
going
of things
on.
on your mind.
I'm expecting you to read my copy Friday night before I send it to make sure I don't say anything really stupid.
For sure.
Have we come up with consensus here too? Is this the first time that a city has had both the first WNBA draft pick and the first NBA draft pick at the?
I don't think it's the first time. I think I saw on X this morning that Cleveland did back in the 2000s at one point. But yeah, not totally sure all of the franchises that have had that.
Yeah. So, Myah, give us an idea here. You had a very interesting story about what she was making outside of what her WNBA salary will be, and a lot more than that. And that's kind of been a point of concern, I know, in the WNBA about the players' salaries and how they don't even come close to matching the NBA, and that they're making more money in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think Paige is really interesting, and just like she's one of the poster children, I think, for NIL. When she was at UConn, she raked in a lot of money. I think her last year she was worth about 1.5 million in that arena. So she's already coming into the league with some cash. But she did sign a deal with Upstart League Unrivaled, and in her first season with them, she would be making at least $220,000. I'm not sure what her exact contract is, but that it's going to be more than what she would make over her 4-year rookie contract with the Wings, which is worth about 350,000. So it's pretty significant.
So explain to us how this will work if she's playing in two leagues.
Yeah.
Not simultaneously, but
not simultaneously. Yeah.
Right.
So the WNBA season kicks off this Friday. It'll last through October for teams that make it all the way to the end. Unrivaled this year took place in Miami from January to March, and so it's in the off season for the players.
And how does that league? It's January to March, but is it the same thing? Is it like a 3-on-3 league? What is it like?
Yeah, it's 3-on-3. It's in one location in Miami. I believe there are 6 teams currently. There's about 36 players. And so the WNBA league commissioner made a good point. They have less mouths to feed right now, so they can pay more people or pay people better. But they also have attracted a lot of high profile investors. And Paige being one of them. She actually had an NIL deal with Unrivaled when she was at UConn. And part of it was her having equity in the league.
Wow. How about that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this whole concept of 3-on-3 basketball, because it's on the men's side too, is very interesting to me. That there's a lot of interest in that. My opinion has always been that the American public, and certainly Dallas-Fort Worth fans in particular, are front runners. If you can't prove that you're top of the line and this is first-rate stuff, then people aren't interested in it. And so obviously if you got Paige Bueckers playing in a 3-on-3 league, then people are going to be interested in it just because of her. So that's a huge coup for them. But I think it's probably a little different on the women's side when you're not making very much money,
Oh yeah.
So that has to be a deciding factor.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the other thing with Unrivaled is the players, they don't have to go overseas, to supplement their income. A lot of them go to countries. And I mean, we've seen what can happen when they go to different countries with like Brittany Griner and everything.
Yeah.
So,
for sure.
Unrivaled is definitely very attractive to a lot of players.
Yeah, I
Kevin,
think
do you
that's
have an issue? Do you have an issue with that? That she will be playing in a 3-on-3 league during what quote unquote constitutes her off season?
well, they don't have a very long season, so it's a little different from the typical men's sports. I would, you know, I know that in any other any male sport, if you were playing another sport, it's like no, that's out of that's in your contract that you can't do that. I can remember way back growing up in Houston and
Oh, it's
Dan
in your
Pass.
contract in Major League Baseball. It's a standard operating contract. You can't ski in the off season.
Oh,
So
absolutely. That's what I was going to say. When I was growing up, Dan Pastorini, the Oilers quarterback, was just a nut, and he captained these drag boat races. He's flying around at 200 miles an hour. Is even involved in an incident where a spectator was killed. And so they had to write that into his contracts that he couldn't do that crazy kind of stuff anymore. So, I mean, you'd have to be concerned, right? If you're the Wings, that all right, Paige is doing this. What happens if she wrecks her knee? Playing in this 3-on-3 league. Obviously
Yeah.
we don't really have a say in it, but boy, you got to be concerned about that kind of thing, don't you?
Yeah, I do feel like they're aware of just like the pay conditions though. And I think that they're definitely for the players making more money where they can. But yeah, it definitely is something to think about of like, okay, she's going to be playing for this other team. There's liability there. So, for sure.
Just a
there's
lot of
risk
insurance.
involved. I look at it a different way. I mean, I look at it from this perspective, right? And I feel like, we are in a real surge stage of growth in women's sports, but it's still a growth stage. And until the WNBA has the ability to really pay these women at close to or equal levels to the men, the WNBA is going to look at outside income and say, hey, they're getting exposure for another period of time. We don't have to pay these dollars. We'll take the risk that somebody's going to get hurt, but it's a win-win for us at this point. And I think it's just to your point, Myah, I think it is a great situation where women don't have to go overseas now to supplement their income, because you were getting into some situations that were dicey, and we do know that travel these days is much dicier. So I feel like at this particular time, it's a system that works for everybody.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I mean, something that I've kind of put into context is the league minimum for the WNBA is around 65,000. So imagine if you play for like the New York Liberty and that's your salary,
Yeah,
that's
I'm
insane.
not sure you can live in New York for sixty-five
That's,
thousand
yeah.
dollars a year.
So you're gonna either have to get a lot of sponsorships, which aren't available to a lot of people, or like something like Unrivaled, or you play overseas.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, now listen. When Paige Bueckers was still at UConn, there was a perception that she did not like talking to the media very much, and she, as a matter of fact, didn't talk to the media.
Mhm.
And I remember the one video I saw where they were just asking her to come over and speak after a game, just to like a Holly Rowe or somebody like that, standing on the waiting for her, and she looked like a 5-year-old who had just been told that she could not have any ice cream. It was just like she just collapsed,
Mhm.
practically. So, but then when I've heard lately, it seemed like that's not really who she is at all. So you have had
No.
exposure to her. Give us an idea of what she's like.
Yeah, so honestly, that's what I thought about her too, because that's what people were telling me. When I was able to go to the draft in New York, and that was like kind of my first time ever seeing her in person. And that morning there was an event at the Empire State Building for all of the draftees, and something I noticed about her, she kind of like stood in the background or stood to the side, didn't really try to like command a lot of attention, even though everybody like wanted to see her. So I took note of that. And then at the draft, same way, she just really navigated herself well, was very calm, very humble, and but just also had a lot of magnetism. Like she's just cool. Like it's hard to kind of explain. But as far as like since she's been in Dallas, I think that she's been great with media. I've had a couple one-on-one time with her, very open, has a sense of humor. I think sometimes she can be reserved in her responses, But I think that's just like from playing at a place like UConn and being media trained in that way. But I haven't, I feel like she's been pretty open for the most part.
Well,
Yeah,
that's it.
our my our baseball backup, Sean, covered UConn, and he's had experience around Gino. And I think that the general opinion is that Gino keeps a rather tight lid on media availability. And I can see how, while in college, that would present some problems for Paige, feeling like she doesn't want to run afoul of her coach. But now she knows that look, this comes with the territory, and she is going to be one of the faces of the WNBA for the next generation. I think that it's just a little easier for her to not have to think that I've got to be careful here because I don't want to step on any toes over here. I think she can just be a little bit more at ease, and I'm sure the league is encouraging her to do that as well.
That's what I was gonna say. Like the wings need that, the league needs that. I think at UConn, it's UConn. You can get away with like not necessarily interacting with the media. People are still gonna care, but the WNBA is still growing. The wings definitely are still growing as an organization. So, the most exposure Paige can get, the better it is for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know her at all, and I plan to meet her on Friday. So
And really, Myah, all Kevin cares about is if he can talk to her. It's
yeah,
it's about
for
what
sure.
they can do for me, Kevin Sherrington, when it comes to the media.
Because it's going so well with me and Corey Seager. That's gone really well. The in spring training, I've talked to Corey a few times one on one, and just for people's information, he doesn't like to do interviews, and
Mm.
so I have done a couple of it. So in spring training, I got him for a few minutes. I was basically going to talk to him about Adolis Garcia, which is the only reason he'd even agree to do it because he doesn't want to talk about himself. And as soon as I shook, we talked a little bit, and then it was over. And he goes, "Thanks a lot. Nice to meet you." I thought, yeah, Corey, it's like the fifth time I'm meeting you, but I'm making a real impression. But yeah, I think maybe what I would like to think about, Paige, is that maybe she's just a team player. Maybe she's just somebody who thinks, there's enough attention on me. I don't really want that, and
Mhm.
I'm just happy for to play and get out here. It's not a question of are you just I just hate the media or I hate dealing with people. It's just that it's enough. I've got enough attention here, and I
Yeah.
just want my teammates to get that too. And if that's what it is, then that'll go really well in this market. I mean, I don't think she has
Yeah.
to be a salesperson, for the Wings. It would help if she had a big personality, but if that's not who she is, then no one's going to want her to do that, and they can accept the fact that she is who she is. I mean, Luka Doncic was not a great salesperson. He was a
Mhm.
terrible interview. And so if they just see that if you're a great player and you play with joy and you exhibit that on the court, then I think that'll be enough for fans in this market.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I will say like Paige, even though she doesn't have that personality, like I said, there's still something. She just has a lot of charisma. I think maybe you'll see that on Friday. And it's kind of like confusing because you're like she isn't super like bubbly and like at least not with media. I don't know what she's like in her personal life. But there's
So
something.
don't get offended if she's not bubbly with you, Kevin.
I'm not going to be offended. Well, that's the thing. Look, this is the thing about Luca, and this is why it was a mistake to trade him, because he's one of the rare players that had that feeling that he wants the ball. He wants to take the shot. There are so many players who do not want to take the shot that you have to have, right? And when they have that, what Maya just referred to as the charisma and the feeling that I got this, that's there's nothing more you can ask from a player. And if that's who Paige Bueckers is, if she has that kind of feeling about herself, that kind of confidence in herself, that listen, everybody, don't worry, I got this. Well, that's all anybody can ask.
And if she makes more passes like she did on that loose ball rebound the other night, nobody's going to care whether she talks or not. That was just absolutely fantastic. The awareness, the strength of that pass. I wish we could show highlights on this because it was amazing. You were at the game, right, Myah?
Yeah, no, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see that. I think we're gonna see a lot of that this season between her and Enrique. So, and then other players too. She really is a good facilitator.
Let me ask you this before we get out of here. A little technical stuff here. How are they both going to be able to play together in the backcourt? People ask that question all the time about Luka and Kyrie. How are they going to mesh in the same backcourt? Do you see this where who's going to be carrying the heaviest load here as far as a facilitator?
I honestly think Paige will be more the facilitator. I
Yeah,
do. Um, I just think just that's the kind of player she is. I also think she's been like Arike's kind of just been carrying for a few years now, and
yeah,
even saying like I'm not used to being so open or being able to kind of do what I want because I've just been her. I've been the main person. I think Paige will definitely be more of that facilitator, and she'll create opportunities for Arike more so
yeah.
than.
Well, and she's such a great shooter. This should, as you
Mhm.
just said, it's going to open her up a lot more. She's going to have a lot more open looks because of this, I would imagine.
I'm going to extend this by an extra 30 seconds. Give us one 30-second answer, Myah, on this. You've been around now to kind of see how the preseason has gone. What do you feel like the level of actual fan excitement is for this season? How much, I don't want to say Paige mania or Bueckers mania, but how much do you think the Wings stand to kind of gain from this situation this year?
I definitely feel like the fandom surrounding the Wings is more of like a cult following. That's how I would describe it. You know, on my mentions on X, like a lot of the people, they kind of have parasocial relationships, honestly, with the players. But I think Paige definitely is a big draw. Like at the game on Saturday, she was signing autographs after the game, and I don't think we've like really seen that where like all of these people were there waiting for her to sign stuff. So there definitely is a level of mania, but it does feel kind of more cult to me, more so than like widespread interest. But that could change. We'll see.
Yeah, this is a remarkable time in Dallas sports history here, adding players of this caliber to the local sports franchises. Cooper Flagg with the Mavericks and now Paige Bueckers with the Wings. It's an exciting time. It's just really opening up a lot of new vistas across the sports landscape. So we'll see what happens here. Well, Mike, thanks for getting on with us. We're going to have you on, obviously, in the future, but we'd love for you to do that and keep us up with everything. And I'll see you out there Friday night.
Yeah, see you on Friday. Thanks. Nice to see you all.
You bet.
Myah, take care of Kevin. He needs a lot of guidance out there,
I
please.
do.
Okay.
I
Will
Thanks
do.
for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, that's going to do it for our Beckers and Wings talk. And now we're going to move over and talk a little hockey with Leah Assimakopoulos. So, Leah, Mikko Rantanen has been probably the biggest pickup for anybody, obviously, in the NHL and in the playoffs this year. He's setting record numbers here. But I don't know that anybody that I can think of in sports, NBA, NFL, MLB, that's added someone who has come in and done what this guy has done. This has just been an epic performance by him so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation is he one of the best trade deadline ads of all time? And you'll see what we do we'll see what they do in the next couple of months here. But I think he's making a case for that already, at least in Dallas history and Stars history. I mean, it's been a historic run for what he's been able to do. And the Stars haven't really had a high-end scorer like him in quite a few years, at least since Jason Robertson had his 100-point season a few years ago. So he's kind of filling that void and really shown an ability to just kind of take over games, and they've needed it here. So he's been incredible to watch.
The thing that strikes me on this trade deadline, right? The last one that I can remember that had this kind of impact was Cliff Lee in 2010 with the Rangers when he won games 1 and 5 and gave them their first playoff series win. Rantanen basically put them in the second round.
Oh, absolutely. Single-handedly. I mean,
all by himself. Yeah, it's that kind of performance.
Yeah, their season was over. They were pretty much 10 minutes away from the summer, and he put the team on his back, scored a hat trick in the third period. It was, an incredible revenge game against his former team, and then pretty much carried them through game one of the second round, too, to get them their first game one win in whatever it was, 5 years. So, yeah.
Let me ask you this about him, because, it's kind of hard to imagine hockey players being problem people. They almost never are, right? The reputation is they're the nice, even despite what they look like on the ice, that they're the nicest guys in sports. Was there any feeling when a guy plays for three teams in one season, and besides the fact that it's a money issue mostly, there's always a feeling too. Is there a problem here with the guy? Was there any anticipation that he might be a problem of some kind, and what has been the actuality of it?
Well, it's funny you bring that up because, of course, especially in Carolina, there was a lot of rumors that he was a locker room cancer and that nobody wanted him around and that he was just kind of hurting their team. And same with Colorado, there was a lot of dialogue that he was just kind of a diva and only wanted the money or whatever. And I mean, since he came to Dallas, it's honestly been nothing further from the truth. Like he's been super open, and we kind of, especially in Stars, we try to kind of vary who we talk to post game. They don't really have one superstar, so we kind of like to spread the wealth around. And with the way he's been playing, he's had to talk to us every single game. And we even said thank you to him the other night, and he was like, "Don't worry about it. It's part of the job." Like he's just been very much a professional, like very easy to talk to. And when he was first traded here, some of the Colorado media actually reached out to some of the Dallas Stars media and said, like, you're going to love working with him. He's just a great guy. And he's really been that. I think a lot of the rumors, it's all about money. Obviously it's a business, and you understand he's a superstar. He wants to make what he feels like he's worth. You can't blame him for that. But I don't think any of what happened this season was because he's a problem player or that people wanted to get rid of him. It was really just some unfortunate circumstances. And it's pretty rare to see a player traded twice in a season, and he went through a lot because of it. But I think he feels like he's in a good spot now, and they love him so far.
We know a lot about post-trade narratives in this town lately, don't we?
Yeah. It can be a little different from team to team. I've noticed that when he has, in a national interview, like on the ice after a game, they're asking the questions, and they're trying to say, wasn't this kind of like revenge for you? Wasn't this? Wasn't that? And he just kind of just waves it all off. He just and not in a dismissive way, but he answers the question without even really confronting that side of it. And to me, that says a lot about the guy. If he were a diva, then he would take that opportunity to say, yeah, this really felt good. I was glad to do
totally agree. Yeah. And I mean, I saw a quote the other day that someone said that he said something about wanting to like jam it down Colorado's throats. And like a bunch of us were kind of talking about it. And maybe he did say that, but like that sounds like nothing that's ever come out of his mouth. And people have really been trying to egg him on to say the revenge stuff, to kind of get those quotes out of him. And that just doesn't really seem like who he is. And I think part of that is just kind of the Finnish guys have a similar, vibe about them. They're all pretty mellow, even keel.
Oh, no question.
And he's one of them. So, it makes a lot of sense when you know his background. And I mean, he just wanted to play, and he wanted to find a good fit for him. And it seems like he's found it.
How have the other players accepted him and his new role with the team?
I mean, I think they've loved having him around. It's kind of hard not to when you're scoring a hat trick every night, but he's got a lot of ties. And I think that was a big reason why he was willing to, sign in Dallas sight unseen for 8 years. I mean, he knew all the Finns. They had just played with each other in the Four Nations tournament a few months before. And I think he and Rope Hintz even played like junior hockey together. So they've gone way, way back. And he knew Matt Duchene from when they were in Colorado together. He just had some connections to some of the players in the locker room. And of course, Colorado and Dallas pretty much seem to play every year in the playoffs and met a lot in the regular season. So there's a lot of familiarity there. I think, it's just been an adjustment of learning to play around a guy like that, because they haven't quite had a superstar of that caliber. And I think for guys like Jason Robertson and Wyatt Johnston, who are maybe used to needing to produce more, it's still an adjustment for them to learn what their role looks like. And Robertson was injured for a while, has now just come back. So it's taken some time. They're now 30 games or so into his time in Dallas, but they're definitely finding that fit now.
They talked about it in Colorado, that maybe he was riding the coattails of Nathan McKinnon a little bit. And obviously, he's surrounded by some skilled players here too. There's no question about that. But I don't think we can really say that anymore, can we?
No, that was a big storyline in the first round. Everyone was saying that, his numbers were only what they were, especially in the playoffs, because of McKinnon. And, McKinnon is one of the best players in the world, and there's no doubt about that. But I think, now there's the question is, was Rantanen not able to show what he could really do when you're playing on a line with Nathan McKinnon? So I think he has completely dismissed that narrative and shown that he can hold his own.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting here to see what they do going forward, of course, and as players get added back, right, as Miro Heiskanen returns, and we see where the defense goes with him. Obviously, that it has to be an uptick there just because of what a great player that he is now. We've said before, and I know that you have said on multiple occasions that Miro's their best player.
Yeah.
Is he still their best player now with Miko?
It's tough. I mean, I think so. I mean, Miko's great, but Miro's a top 3 defenseman in the world, I think. I mean, if you look at just all around ability and just the way that Miro changes a game, and he plays 30 minutes a night in the playoffs, and that's really hard to account for when that's missing from the lineup. So, I mean, he probably, in terms of just consistency, and Miko's been great, but he's also only been around for a couple of months. So, Miro's been around for years, and they've seen what he's done over the span of 5 years or so. So we'll see. It's definitely they definitely have a couple players kind of vying for that title, but I'd still give it to Miro.
And yeah, there's a difference, right? Because I mean, playoff hockey changes players maybe more than any other sport. I think
Yeah.
you don't know what you're going to get in the playoffs, and guys just rise to a different level. I don't know how you quantify that when you're trying to evaluate somebody.
Yeah, it feels like a completely different sport. And I mean, you can even just see the difference in covering game 82, which I know didn't really matter much for the Stars this year, and then immediately going into a game 1 of a series against Colorado, which felt like a Stanley Cup final in a lot of ways. It's just a completely different game. And Pete DeBoer even talked about this the other day. Someone asked him about how, some of his top point producers haven't really been producing, and he said, well, it's apples and oranges. I mean, they may have been producing in the regular season, but just because they're not producing in the playoffs, it's completely different. It's a different standard. So I think a lot of younger guys especially have to kind of learn what that means. And, for a guy like Wyatt Johnston, he had a great run last year. I think that, that helps a lot to have a couple playoffs under your belt. But yeah, it's a different ballgame. I don't think there's any sport that quite shifts like that when the postseason comes around.
You know who's had a hard road in the playoffs?
Who's that?
You. How does one get to Winnipeg?
It's not easy, I'll tell you that. I flew to Fargo, North Dakota, and drove across the border. When I go back, I will be flying through Chicago. But yeah, Winnipeg, and then if the Stars advance, it looks like Edmonton's going to be the next round, and Toronto looks pretty good. So a lot of time in Canada this year.
So yeah, how long a drive was it from Fargo to Winnipeg?
A little over 3 hours.
It's just like going to Austin. No big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but you don't have to take a flight first for 3 hours to get to where you're going to start to go to Austin
and cross the border.
This is
you don't have moose crossings either.
Right.
This is what she signed up for. That hockey beat. You got to be.
Right.
You got to be tough. Make sure now that when you get to Fargo or do things like that, that you have canned goods in the car in case there's a snow bank or something like that you plow into.
Exactly.
You have to be able to have
bring a shovel.
Was it a scenic drive from Fargo to Winnipeg?
Not even a little bit. It was
really?
Flat and fields and trucks, and it felt like driving through the Midwest.
Oh, no. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. It was a straight shot, easy drive. So.
And then you drove back to Fargo to catch a flight home?
Yep.
Nice.
Wow.
That was fun. So let me, before we get out of here, Lee, I want to just talk about this. Should the Stars get past, the Jets here, the feeling is obviously that they've had to play Colorado and then Winnipeg, 2 of the toughest, in the conference right off the bat. Is there any way possible if they get past this, that they start to think things are getting easy now? Does Pete DeBoer got a chore in front of him, to keep the guys, going if they should clear the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, I think last year that kind of became a bit of the narrative too. I think a lot of people thought they were going to beat Edmonton in the Western Conference Finals because they got through 2 really tough series against Colorado and Vegas off the bat. So I think they need to be careful to not have that narrative creep in again. And I think it's been pretty clear that this Edmonton team looks really good. And I mean, assuming they play Edmonton, you never know, Vegas might surge back in the series, but Edmonton has a pretty substantial lead at this point. And, they've got Connor McDavid. They've got Leon Draisaitl, who's a Hart Trophy finalist this year. I mean, they have some of the best players in the world on their team. So it definitely doesn't get easier from here. And it's just the Western Conference. I mean, the Western Conference, it feels like whoever comes out of that has a pretty good chance to win the whole thing, or they don't, because they've just spent the last 6 weeks beating each other up, where the road from the East is maybe a little bit easier this year. But I think the Stars kind of know every series is going to be tough, and they want to get over that hump, though. They've been stuck in that Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals the last couple of years, and feels like they might have the pieces to do it.
Yeah, it does. Sure does. All right, Leah, thanks for visiting with us today. We'll be back on with you here when we can figure out what they're doing and how far they're going to go. So we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much. We appreciate that. Now we're going to move over and talk about the Rangers. Evan, can you believe what Bret Boone has done for the Rangers in such a short period of time?
Well, I don't know how much he's done, but
look, it's all Bret Boone. Donnie Ecker, a cancer in that clubhouse, has been rooted out, and Bret Boone has saved the Rangers. World Series, here we come.
We need to make sure that everybody knows that's facetiousness alert from you, Kevin. But listen, I do think that Bret Boone has come in and basically said, I'm here to listen, which is the right thing for him to do in the first week. I think the one thing that he's basically said to guys is watch the game, play the game, look at the scoreboard, play to the scoreboard. And he's kind of stepped back from loading them down with information. I think if there was any critique that I had over the Rangers hitting approach, it seemed like what I was seeing was a team that was going to the plate trying to process too much when it got into the batter's box. And it does seem like, it's easy to say, it does seem like when you're hitting 5 home runs in a game like they did against Detroit over the weekend, but they have had more productive at bats in situations. They did have a situation on Saturday in Detroit. Wyatt Langford scored 3 runs without a base hit. Adolis Garcia had 2 RBIs that night without a base hit. Evan Carter had a 111-mile-an-hour homer, but maybe his best at bat was on Sunday afternoon, kind of getting the Rangers off to a start with a bloop base hit with 2 outs and 2 strikes. So I think that's been the early message, and I do think that maybe a little bit less information for these players has helped them relax a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is, because look, there is a really good possibility that we're going to snap out of this, slump anyway, right? But you can't gamble on that. If you're Chris Young, if you're Bruce Bochy, you had to make a move at this point, because it wasn't just about this season; it was last season as well, right? You didn't have just 2 months of information here to go on.
That needs to be very clear. That needs to be very clear. This was not just for the first 35 games of the season.
No, but that's what Chris Young told me at the end of spring training, was that, hey, I'm not going to be as patient as I was last year, and that has certainly come to the fore. He has lived up to that, and I look, I didn't have a problem with any move that he's made. Leody Taveras has been picked up by the Mariners. He's played kind of like Leody Taveras plays. He's made some nice plays in right field for them. Julio Rodriguez is still staying in center field. He's had a couple of hits. He's done a little bit of this. He's run pretty well. He's a decent player, but I don't feel like, in my mind, that Leody Taveras is a winning player. I define a winning player as a guy who's smart, who understands the situation, knows what do I have to do here. Just what you were talking about a minute ago about situational hitting, which is that I'm going to go all the way back to Jose Canseco. One of the things that struck me about him as a player, here was a guy, he's one of the Bash brothers, who brought about the steroid era in baseball. A huge guy, huge man, and yet with 2 strikes on him, he choked up. And he understood situational hitting. And so that's what I needed to see from the Rangers here. There's too many times you would watch them, and as you pointed out, ad infinitum about people like Adolis Garcia, his swing rate just has gone up leaps and bounds over the last several years. He's just swinging at everything. And it's what we used to say about Josh Hamilton. Remember when Josh went through that phase where he always swung at the first pitch, didn't matter where it was. And if I'd been the Rangers manager when Ron Washington when he was there, I would have just said, don't swing at the first pitch. I don't care where it is. Don't swing at it, because they're not going to throw you a strike on the first pitch because they know you're going to swing at it. So don't throw it. So don't swing at the first pitch no matter where it is. And eventually then they'll have to start throwing you a strike if you're not swinging at it. So I think that's the biggest thing for me with this club. That sooner or later the power was going to come back. That was not an issue for them. The issue was just, not doing the things they needed to do at the plate, chasing way too much. And that doesn't necessarily mean taking pitches, but you just got to be smarter about these things. That you see that ball spinning and it's at the lower part of the zone, lay off of that pitch.
Look, this is a problem that is endemic throughout baseball. And I think that the best teams are the teams that have reined this back in a little bit, but we have gone to an era with so much information available on biomechanics, and spray charts, and visualizations, that hitters go to the plate thinking about one thing and one thing only: their swing. And what do they need to do to get off their best swing? And I think that, you watch players go back to the dugout, and the Rangers have cut back on this in the last couple of weeks, but you'd watch players go back to the dugout and immediately get into the iPads that were there to look at their last at bat to see where their swings were. And what Bret Boone's message is, don't worry about so much what your swing did. Worry about the situation. Your swing can adjust to the situation. You don't have to have the same swing every time. You need to be more aware when there is a situation that needs to be optimized to make sure that a run scoring opportunity doesn't get frittered away. And look, it's going to be hit and miss. On Monday night, the Rangers went out against a team that had won 7 baseball games and facing a guy who had a 6.8 ERA and were no hit for 5 innings. But they did find a way to win that game, with a late home run from Wyatt Langford. I don't know why I sound like Robert F. Kennedy all of a sudden.
All of a sudden you got so emotional talking about Langford's home run. I got teary-eyed too, when that happened.
But I do think that, that's been the emphasis. And to that point, Kevin, I went to a couple of hitters on Sunday, and I just wanted to say, what is the message you've gotten from Bret Boone? And I talked to Josh Young, I talked to Jonah Heim, and almost verbatim, they gave me the same thing. Watch the game, play to the game, understand the situation more.
Well, that was interesting to me too when I read that, when you wrote that, because look, how much difference can a guy make? I've told this story 1,000 times, but it's like when Bobby Witt went down, and he came back, and he was finally the pitcher that the Rangers always wanted him to be. And Bobby Valentine was all mad about it in his office one day, and he was talking off the record, and he said, "What did they tell him down there that we didn't tell him up here?" And I wanted to say to him, well, it was Ferguson Jenkins telling him that in the minor leagues, not Tom House. And so I wonder how much of this is the fact that it's Bret Boone who's talking to them now, who's not a Hall of Famer, but he was a really good hitter, especially for a second baseman.
2 top 10 MVP finishes, 2 Silver Sluggers, and 3 All-Star appearances are significant. And I do think that gives you immediate cachet, and maybe even more so with Bret than another player who didn't have a connection to the Rangers franchise, just because that family is so well known in baseball as a 3-generational family, with his brother managing the Yankees. And that, I think, gets you some immediate cachet. And I've said this to people over and over again. It's not like anybody is going to come in there and revolutionize what the Rangers are doing. It's not like what Donnie Ecker was teaching was wrong or inaccurate. Sometimes when things don't go right, it's all about just hearing the same message in a different way. There's no explaining it. but you just hear it from a different voice. Maybe because you've heard the same way for 4 years, all of a sudden you hear it from a different voice. It registers a little bit differently.
Well, I like, though, going back to what you said a minute ago about the guys talking to each other, is that, we don't know what's going on in the dugout during the game, right? All we know is if you can't even see the dugout from where we're sitting in the press box. And then if you're watching the game on TV, you can see guys sitting there and they might be talking to each other. And I don't know what the communication level is like among the Rangers. But the idea that you would have these guys encouraging them to talk to each other during the game and about what they're seeing and what's happening out there, if there is more of that now than there was in the past, that can only be a good thing. And then the second part of this thing with Bret Boone to me is, Evan, this is not a real dynamic clubhouse. This is not a place where you walk in there and there's a lot of characters and livening things up. That's one of the reasons why Chris Young went out and got Jock Peterson in the first place, was that he wanted somebody who had a little life to him, somebody who could have a little fun, because some of these guys were allowing things to get to them, aka, e.g. Jonah Heim was letting stuff happen to them, and their body language is bad, and they're just kind of, it's causing things to fester. I just wonder if a guy like Bret Boone, who can talk about anything. I mean, if you go back and look on his podcast at the topics he's had in the last month, he's talked about, Dion and Shador. He's talked about, White Lotus. He's talked about the fact that his aversion to fast food. I mean, it's like a dozen different things in the last month that he talks about. And as Sean McFarland pointed out, the very first question that anybody in the media, the Dallas-Fort Worth media, asked him, he gave an 8-minute answer. So this is a guy who can talk about lots of things. And sometimes, as we know in baseball, that's not always a good thing. Chris Woodward talked too much, to the players, and they just ended up tuning him out. But it's different if you're talking about, all right, this is what you got to do, this is what you got to do, this is what you got to do. And if you're just saying, hey, did you see that thing on TV the other day? And then the next thing you know, they're just goofing around and having a good time.
Well, look, one thing they used to do, and Travis Jankowski, when he was here, was kind of an organizer of this, was like they'd get on the field and they'd start going through BP, and it was called show talk. And it was just about, we'd talk about stuff that you talk about when you're in the show, whether it's Major League Baseball or last year, they had a long discussion about the barge hitting the bridge in Baltimore, just anything. And sometimes that gets you out of your own head and just gets you in a space where it's like, go out and play the game. We're just around guys. All of that said, I still think the most important thing Bret Boone said when he first arrived was the self-awareness to say, I am in listen mode and it's not my forte. Because most importantly, what he needs to do to get to know these hitters is hear from them. The one danger you run into with a successful big league player who's had no coaching experience on his resume is the concern that a guy walks into the clubhouse and is going to tell everybody, hey, this is how I did it. This is what this guy told me, and this is how you're going to do it. And he knows better than everybody. You don't do that with players that you're just getting to know. And I think, to his credit, Bret has come in. He's been entertaining with some of the stories he's told, but he hasn't been condescending with any of the stories he's told.
I don't know him at all. Never was around him, and never had even, I don't think I've ever even interviewed him. So I don't know what he's like, but I listened to a couple of his podcasts. And if you listen to those, he doesn't come off at all as a know-it-all. He's an interesting guy who's intrigued by things. He's a curious guy. He seems to like all kinds of things and people. And from my way of life, I'm all for that. He's my kind of guy. If that's what you're going to be like, and be interested in things and other people, and not, there's a difference between talking about yourself and talking about other stuff, and if that's who he's going to be, and if he's able to distract them from some of the pressures they're putting on themselves, if he's able to make them laugh, whatever he can do, that's the whole point of it. When we talk about adding someone like Jock Peterson to a clubhouse, 162 games, you got to have somebody who can lighten the mood a little bit. and you don't need another coach. I don't know. It used to be, I don't know. There was a time when you could talk to coaches anytime you wanted. And now in clubhouses, their coaches are just like running past you, and you practically have to trip them to get them to stop. And so you could talk to them and say something. So I don't even try anymore. So the idea that, as you have done for me so kindly, as we're recording this on Tuesday, you set me up with a 4:30 interview with Bret Boone. They don't make those guys do that. They can say, no, you know what? I'm going to be too busy. I don't want to talk to him. Well, he's going to sit down and talk to me at 4:30. So that's really encouraging, and it makes him my new favorite Rangers coach.
Once again, it's all about what can you, Ranger, do for me, Kevin Sherrington. I'm glad to hear that. Listen, I will just say this, that, I kind of had prodded him into telling this story when we were talking on the field in Detroit about Edgar Martinez's impact on him. And he told this story about situational hitting that he got from Edgar Martinez. And it was just, it wasn't like, you need to do this or you need to do that. It was just a story about the situation in which Edgar had hit the ball to the right side the first year that Bret was with Seattle, which ended up being the best year of his career. And Edgar went into this whole thing, and the way Bret told this story, about Edgar saying, I'm trying to do my job, which is get a hit, but I'm going to make sure that the guy moves up. And here's why. Because maybe the guy behind me is struggling and he needs an RBI. And if he gets an RBI, maybe it gets him going. And if it gets him going, maybe the guys on the bench all see it and they say, well, if Edgar does this, I can do this. And I can help this. And all of a sudden you've got this great chemistry. And I'd written it all down. It was a great story. Written it all down, put it in the column that I wrote Sunday for Monday. And Monday morning, Tom Grieve texted me and he said, I was reading that quote and it sounded like Ron Washington was talking. And it was a great analogy, because he did kind of, he kind of got rolling like Ron or like Wash did. And you had this, you could sense this kind of infectious, positive feel for what the team could do. And I think that's important. That kind of energy is important for any team to have.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk to. So then people would say, well, then what's the manager doing? And I think that's one of the things that people don't quite understand about Bruce Bochy. His first season here, when they were on their way to winning the World Series, we were always asking, well, what does he say to you in the clubhouse? What does he do this? And the players were trying to be nice about it, but basically they were saying, well, he doesn't really say very much, and really, in my mind, the best managers don't say a lot. If you looked at the best managers in the Rangers history, certainly Johnny Oates would be one of those. He didn't say anything in the clubhouse. He stayed out of the clubhouse. He let the players police that. So Bruce Bochy is who he is, and you don't want him to be anything else. The man has won 4 World Series. He's going to the Hall of Fame. He's in the conversation for the top 2 or 3 managers in the history of the game. I don't want him to be anything that he's not, but he's certainly not a guy that's going to, inject a lot of life into the place. And so if you
the way he injects life is through humor. Boch has that dry.
Absolutely. He's not an ogre. He's not a bad guy to play for. But he is a guy that he's the kind of guy who he's the kind of guy you want as a father or your favorite uncle or your grandfather, right? He's the guy who gets along with everybody and tolerates everybody and facilitates things and makes you feel good.
And he motivates people not by where they don't fear him, but they want to do well for him. And that's how he uplifts guys. But the other thing about Bruce Bochy, to your point, is I really think he also understands the hierarchy in the clubhouse. I'm not going to go in there and ride hard on the hitters. I'll offer my comments. I'll offer a comment here and there, but that's the domain of the guys who are working intimately with the hitters every day. And if he's got a message that he wants Bret Boone to disseminate, he'll get that across to Bret Boone, and then let Bret or Seth Connor or Justin Vealey deliver it more intimately to the players when he's got them in a smaller group, when you've got more attention span, and all of that. So, listen, I don't like the fan reaction to fire this guy or fire that guy or fire the other guy. I think you and I are both on the same page here, where Chris Young felt like this was, and not entirely of Donnie Ecker's doing. This was a situation that had gone on a year and a half, and maybe the way the message needed to be delivered just needed to be freshened up with a different voice. And there's no explaining that. There's no necessarily a deficiency in a coach. But I think what they've seen from Boone in the first week are the things that they were hoping to see. We'll see how long that carries over. We'll see if these guys now, the important part for me is that these guys take up the mantle. I think the next step in all of this is for those players to kind of say, okay, we're going to do this talking amongst ourselves. We're going to do the kinds of things to like encourage our teammates to do what the game asked at that moment, and it's going to become much more second nature.
Yeah, I agree with all that. That'd be good if they could just do that. All right, that's going to do it for our podcast this week. We threw a lot of stuff at you. Had on rotating panel of guests, and that's what we're going to continue to do now as the weeks and months and years come. Decades, maybe not decades, but we'll see. It's going to be fun. We hope you'll hang in there with us. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.